Hey, welcome to Lecture 13. This is a lecture on Ezekiel. And when you're talking about Ezekiel, you usually should have a quick sip of coffee first. I want to make sure you have your mind all alert and ready to go. Ezekiel is, without doubt, one of the strangest prophets and one of the strangest books in the entire Old Testament. In order to try to understand some of the oddities that take place in the book, let's start by examining Ezekiel as a person. So, what's really important to know about Ezekiel is that his life and his context in which he's writing takes place within the fall of Judah in the south, the southern nation, Judah. Um, and he also writes during the Babylonian exile. So, so you got that going on. This is a time of trauma. We already saw that in the prophecy of Isaiah, the Assyrians came in. They end up completely destroying Israel in the north. So this is 100 years ago. Judah in the south managed to stave off attack by the Assyrians, and they managed to last another 130 or so years. But in the year 597, 596, Babylon invades Judah and tries to take Jerusalem. Um, they partially succeed in their attack on Jerusalem by taking out all of the elite, all of the aristocracy. And Ezekiel was a part of this company because he was a priest at the temple. Now, again, in terms of trying to understand what's going on in the book of Ezekiel, notice that as a priest, Ezekiel's whole life would have centered around the temple. This is significant for you to remember as you read some of the things that we see in this book. He was used to offering sacrifices, performing ritualistic duties of a priest. So a lot of the imagery that comes out in this writing reflects this. Priesthood and temple life was Ezekiel's world. The temple being at the center of everything was very important because it was understood that Yahweh's presence actually dwelt in the temple. Because of this, it can be said that holiness is also an important theme in Ezekiel. And much like the word law that we looked at a few lectures ago, holiness often contains linguistic baggage and misunderstanding. But in brief, holiness just basically means set apart or set apart for God. In Ezekiel, holiness surrounded the temple. So all of his life, all of his duties, all of his priestly duties were about things that are set apart for God. All right. In Ezekiel, holiness surrounded the temple. For example, one of the primary duties of priesthood in the temple was to learn what is holy and what is not holy. Ezekiel would have known this system very well. When the temple was destroyed in the year 586 by the Babylonians, some questions that Ezekiel must have dealt with personally would have been, well, now that the temple's gone, where's Yahweh's presence? What can even be considered holy anymore without the temple? What is my duty now as a priest of Yahweh? In brief, it can be said that Ezekiel's world and the world of the Israelites in Judah came crashing down on them as they entered exile under the reign of the Babylonian Empire. So you should know that during this time, Jewish people, knowing that the Babylonians were coming, some of them escaped down to Egypt, and many Israelite Jewish people had already been taken into captivity by the Assyrians. The Assyrians, their policy was those that they didn't kill, they would take off into exile and put them in new countries, and then they would bring people from other conquered countries and put them back in your country. So the northern nation of Israel would have ended up with, some Jewish people that survived and managed to stay there, but also other people that the Assyrians brought in. And Jews ended up being scattered all around the ancient Near East, Egypt, Persia, Babylon, Assyria, and other places. So that's important to know. Of all the prophets, Ezekiel is easily the most ecstatic and dramatic. The book is full of moments of craziness. It really is. It's odd. Ezekiel does what are often called, quote, sign acts. So one example of his sign act is when he lays on his left side for 390 days to reflect how far gone things had become. Another sign act includes his baking of, quote, defiled bread. So we'll spare you the details of the bread here, but if you want to know the secret ingredient, take a minute to read chapter 4 of Ezekiel. Also, Ezekiel's visions are full of intense and crazy imagery, often displaying fire and color and gemstones. In terms of the structure of the book, when overusing the book of Ezekiel, scholars often employ two different methods and divide Ezekiel up into two different parts. The first method is to observe Ezekiel's primary visions in chapters 1, 8 through 11, and 40 through 48. The second method, which has become really the preferred method for understanding Ezekiel, is to analyze the chronology of Ezekiel's life. For example, in the years 593 through 587, he's helping the people prepare for the oncoming judgment. His oracles or messages from God are mostly judgments of doom. In 586, when the temple actually falls, Ezekiel is already in exile, and his oracles or words from God begin to transition away from doom and towards hope. In the years 585 through 571, his oracles start to reflect even stronger hope to the exiles. So, the bad news has already come, and they're already in exile, and now he's talking about, well, what is God doing next, and what is the good news from God? In wrapping up our discussion on Ezekiel, let's list off some of the characteristics and some of the themes that can be found in it. First, for obvious reasons we already discussed, priestly concerns and holiness are large concerns for Ezekiel. God's presence or absence is also important. In Hebrew, this is often expressed by the word kavod, which can mean holiness, but more accurately it means weightiness. Another characteristic includes the extraordinary things that happen. Crazy visions, extreme sign acts, metaphorical imagery abound in the text. Again, it's a strange book. Judgment is prevalent as well. It goes without saying that this is not a really happy book most of the time. It tries to make sense out of the trauma that Ezekiel and that the nation are experiencing. But finally, hope becomes a prevalent theme by Ezekiel chapter 37. And that's probably the most famous of the scenes in Ezekiel. It's the vision of dry bones. And while it might not seem like seeing a vision of dry, dead bones might not seem to be a word of hope, because they're the bones of the people of Israel, they become a word of hope. Let me read verses 11 through 14 from chapter 37. Then God said to me, Son of man, these bones are the people of Israel. They say, our bones are dried up, and our hope is gone. We are cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. My people, I am going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel. Then you, my people, will know that I am your God. When I open your graves and bring you up out of them, I will put my spirit in you, and you will live, and I will settle you in your own land. Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken, and I have done it, declares the Lord. So again, a word of real hope at the end of a kind of a dismal, disappointing a series of messages from the prophet Ezekiel. So there you go. There's Ezekiel in a bit of a nutshell.